Okay, so does this sound like you? You love NPR's podcasts, you wish you could get more of all your favorite shows, and you want to support NPR's mission to create a more informed public. If all that sounds appealing, then it is time to sign up for the NPR Plus bundle. Learn more at plus.npr.org.
Hello, hello. I'm Brittany Luce, and you're listening to It's Been a Minute from NPR, a show about what's going on in culture and why it doesn't happen by accident. This week, we're connecting the dots between the American flag, the Catholic Church, and Beyoncé. I know. How are all of these things connected? Well, we're going to find out with music and Black feminism scholar, Dr. Daphne A. Brooks, and mass communication historian, Dr. Nicholas Cull. Daphne, Nick, welcome to It's Been a Minute.
Great to be here.
Thanks for having us, Brittany.
Okay, so I got a real quick question for you. Have you ever watched something on TV and thought, okay, now this is propaganda? Have you ever had that moment?
Whenever I see Lean Greenwood singing Proud to be an American.
Well, I not only notice when things are propaganda, but I also quite enjoy it because I can see that it's meant to connect to me, and I enjoy that feeling.
You mean you enjoy the feeling of being reached out to?
Yeah. You know, Brittany, I tear up for everyone's national anthem.
So you're highly susceptible to nationalism across the board.
These are universal themes that are invoked.
I get that. I don't know. I used to watch that show on NBC. It's not on anymore, called This Is Us. I felt like watching that show every week. They were trying to tell me that I needed to have 3 children. I don't. But that's a story for another time. Our story today begins with none other than Miss Beyoncé Giselle Knowles-Carter, who spent her Christmas Day performing the NFL halftime show in her hometown of Houston, Texas.
It's only right that we do Texas Hold'em for the first time in Houston, Texas on Christmas. Y'all help me sing.
The performance lasted more than 12 minutes and brought many of the things we associate with Black Southern rodeo culture, horses, line dances, and even real-life rodeo queens, to the homes of more than 27 million viewers in the United States alone. But as the singer ascended above the crowd, belting songs from her latest album, Cowboy Carter, some viewers got a different message. In the days after the halftime performance, a TikTok user that goes by the name Han posited that through Beyoncé's widespread usage of the American flag and her embrace of other symbols of Americana on the world stage, Mrs. Knowles-Carter was acting as America's best press agent.
Beyoncé is this country's best propagandist right now. Like, no one is doing it like her.
This spurred a flurry of responses.
So I literally don't post for 2 weeks, and then I come back and look at TikTok, and all of a sudden Beyoncé Bowl was making people proud to be a Black American, and that's a bad thing?
The girls are being very disingenuous. Nobody not once said that Beyoncé is above critique. Real quick, if you were not raised in the South, I need you to shut your mouth.
This went on for weeks. Now, Beyoncé is no stranger to using her music to communicate a message. Who can forget when she performed in front of the word feminist in all caps and huge lettering on the MTV Video Music Awards? Or when she posed on top of a sinking New Orleans police car in her music video for Formation. She's also not the only superstar to traffic heavily in political imagery. You know, artists across genres have done this as well, from Michael Jackson to Bruce Springsteen. But the question of whether these acts constitute propaganda has me asking, just how prominent is propaganda in our pop culture? So, Daphne, Nick, is propaganda the right word for what Beyoncé did with her NFL halftime show?
I just have a problem with it. All art is political. The great cultural studies scholar Stuart Hall told us that many years ago in a landmark piece called What is This Black in Black Popular Culture? He told us that, you know, culture is not a zero-sum game. And so I I just think propaganda feels like a flattening out of the ways in which we think about art and cultural performance in this day and age.
Nick, what about you? Do you think propaganda is the right word?
Yeah, for me as a historian who specializes in propaganda, I think that there's enough real political propaganda in the world attempting to manipulate people into doing things politically, voting one way, invading a particular country, that I'm fully occupied looking into that rather than looking at artists who have a political agenda that is coming out in their performance. So I don't find the term propaganda particularly helpful as a way of talking about what Beyoncé is doing right now. I won't be rewriting my introduction to propaganda course based on what happened on Christmas Day. There's plenty else going on.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like what you're both saying is that perhaps propaganda is not the right word here, but it is important that people read culture critically, even the culture that they enjoy the most. It feels like we're in a time where people are highly concerned about the role of propaganda in the media. There's been many such times in the past, but I feel like that's definitely something that's coloring the world that we're in right now. Even looking at the platform of TikTok itself, one of the concerns the US government has is that its algorithms could be used or will be used to disseminate propaganda. Meta, the social media company, has announced that it will end its fact-checking feature in favor of quote unquote community notes. This is the soup we're all stewing in right now, right? What do the concerns about Beyoncé and propaganda say about this moment?
I'm thinking about the fact that we live in 2025 on the edge of a new administration that's also an old administration, in a world in which influencer is a lucrative and high profile line of occupation. And the heightened level of paranoia, anxiety, the extent to which publics are feeling manipulated, feeling vulnerable to the kinds of messages that are generated in a variety of different institutions.
What struck me about this whole controversy is that the term propaganda is being used in two different ways. There is the idea that people will say this is political persuasion, therefore it's propaganda. And then we have the evaluative use or the moral use of the term propaganda to say, this is a part of speech I disagree with. This is something that is untrue, that is negatively manipulative. And within these posts, people are using it in two ways. The word propaganda comes originally from the Catholic Church. But of course, as soon as it's terminology that the Catholic Church is using, there's people all over Northern Europe who think it's the worst thing in the world. And so almost from the moment of its birth, the term propaganda had a negative charge for some people.
I just was going to say, I do wonder if what people, at least some people, were wrestling with was a sort of presumptive, spectacular patriotism that was bound up in the performance, but that would really elide the nuances of social critique that are bound up in the Cowboy Carter Project, and even in a song like "Ya, which she performed at the show, that has the infamous line, "Whole lot of red in that white and blue." It tells us again so much, the reaction about this moment that we're in, about about these questions about how America as a multiracial democracy is broken in many, many ways. But I think it all points to an enormous amount of angst that Beyonce's performance seemed to trigger.
But, this suggests to me that we're living in one of those regular panics in American life over propaganda. people become convinced that they're being manipulated. Think back to the panic that followed World War II with people like McCarthy claiming that America was full of manipulation. But we saw this after World War I. We saw this in the immediate aftermath of the American Revolution. And at various times, Americans become very concerned about manipulation. And maybe that's a function of being a democracy, that everything here has to happen because of what the people want. And so forming people's ideas is going to be inherently controversial.
Coming up, what you and other Americans may have fundamentally misunderstood about propaganda.
We think of propaganda as being an idea that is invented by somebody and then transmitted from their head to our head. And to me, the most effective propaganda doesn't do that.
Stick around.
This is Eric Glass. On This American Life, sometimes we just show up somewhere, turn on our tape recorders, and see what happens.
If you can't get 7 cars in 12 days, you got to look yourself in the mirror and say, holy, what are you kidding me?
Like this car dealership, trying to sell its monthly quota of cars, and it is not going well.
I just don't want one balloon to a car. Balloon the whole freaking place so it looks like a circus.
Real life stories every week.
Consider This is a daily news podcast, and lately the news is about a big question. How much can one guy change?
They want change.
What will change look like for energy?
Drill, baby, drill.
Schools?
Take the Department of Education, close it.
Healthcare?
Better and less expensive.
Follow coverage of a changing country.
Promises made, promises kept. We're going to keep our promises.
On Consider This, the afternoon news podcast from NPR.
Lately on the NPR Politics podcast, we're talking about a big question. How much can one guy change?
They want change.
What will change look like for energy?
Drill, baby, drill.
Schools.
Take the Department of Education, close it.
Healthcare.
Better and less expensive.
Follow coverage of a changing country.
Promises made, promises kept. We're going to keep our promises.
On the NPR Politics podcast.
What's in store for the music, TV, and film industries for 2025? We don't know, but we're making some fun, bold predictions for the new year. Listen now to the Pop Culture Happy Hour podcast from NPR.
What each of you are saying is what Beyoncé is doing isn't exactly propaganda, but what she's presenting and how she's presenting it isn't coming out of or into a vacuum. I mean, first of all, the American flag is not a neutral symbol.
Not at all.
For many people in this country and outside of it, not a neutral symbol. But also, Beyoncé engages with politics in real life. I mean, she supported Democratic presidential candidates like former President Obama and Vice President Harris. She's donned Black Panther-inspired costuming at the Super Bowl, another NFL jump scare, in 2016. And we all know the Carters, both Beyoncé and her husband, they both have friendly business relationships to the NFL after the whole Colin Kaepernick situation, after which the NFL had a serious reputation crisis on their hands, right? Allegations of racism on their hands. And Beyoncé seems to jump back and forth between anti-establishment and pro-establishment imagery. But like I've said, she isn't the only one. Why is it important to take note of the dissonances in this kind of messaging from huge public figures?
One of my favorite lines from Stuart Hall's piece that I referenced earlier is when he makes this argument that by definition, Black popular culture is a contradictory space. There are always positions to be won in popular culture, but no struggle can capture popular culture itself for our side or theirs, quote unquote. So I guess I just, I think keeping in mind that popular culture is a terrain of struggle and not a zero-sum game, as Hall puts it, is really important. And that Beyoncé really presents so many different opportunities to think through those contradictions, as you just noted, Brittany.
Well, okay. I have one last question. When we are presented with media that has political messaging, what are the questions we should be asking ourselves as we interpret it?
I think the first thing everyone has to ask themselves when consuming media is, why are they telling me this? And that might sound like an obvious thing, but I think there's too little analysis goes on. People don't look for the motive behind the message. I think that Americans fundamentally misunderstand what propaganda is.
Yeah.
We have a model of propaganda where we think of propaganda as being an idea that is invented by somebody and then transmitted from their head to our head. And to me, the most effective propaganda doesn't do that. The most effective propaganda is when a communicator recognizes what's already in my head and then affirms it with their messaging and connects the secret thought I've always had to something in the world. And maybe what Beyoncé is doing that is like a propagandist is connecting to these images that are important to people because they're images of America, images of Texas, images of rodeo culture. And she's putting herself in there and making a point through articulating those images. And for many people, what she's saying is, you too are part of the mainstream of America. And that's a moving and a powerful thing.
How about this to complement what Nick says? You know, what is the story that's being told in this performance, on this recording, in this visual album? What are the aesthetics that are gripping you? What kind of spectacle is holding your attention? What is that narrative? And then what do you think of that narrative? You know, I mean, all art is telling some kind of a story, and holding on to our own critical authority to be able to extrapolate meaning with regards to the story that we're interpreting is what makes us thinking and human. And that's exciting. And we need more of that in this day and age.
So it sounds like you're both advocating for critical thinking. And that is something that I can 150% get behind. This is not propaganda. Well, Dr. Cull, Dr. Brooks, I've learned so much here. Thank you both so much.
Thank you, Brittany.
Thanks for having us.
That was music and Black feminism scholar Dr. Daphne A. Brooks and mass communication historian Dr. Nicholas Cull. This episode of It's Been a Minute was produced by
Corey Antonio Rose, Barton Girdwood.
This episode was edited by
Jasmine Romero.
Our executive producer is
Verilyn Williams.
Our VP of programming is
Yolanda Sanguini.
All right, that's all for this episode of It's Been a Minute from NPR. I'm Brittany Luce. Talk soon.
Since the beginning of women's sports, there's been a struggle to define who qualifies for the women's category. Tested, from NPR's Embedded podcast and CBC, takes you inside that struggle. Listen to Tested, the series that was named one of the 10 best podcasts of 2024 by Apple, Vulture, and The New York Times. It's season 20 of NPR's Embedded podcast.
For every headline, there's also another story about the people living those headlines. On weekdays, Up First brings you the day's biggest news. On Sundays, we bring you Closer with a single story about the people, places, and moments reshaping our world. Your news made personal. Every Sunday on the Up First podcast from NPR.
Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy have outlined their plans to slash the federal workforce with the help of a team of, quote, small government crusaders. What's in store for federal workers, and how are they planning for change? This January, 1A's .gov series guides you through various government agencies and the people working for you. Listen to the 1A podcast from NPR.